Pastor Doug here from Crossroads. It's great to be with you. I hope that today's message will draw you closer to Jesus.
How many of you have ever been in a situation you didn't want to be in? Or circumstances that you didn't choose? How many of you have been there? Maybe it was a job you absolutely hated. Maybe you had a bad roommate you couldn't get rid of. Maybe one who constantly leaves the kitchen cabinet doors open despite being told numerous times and having numerous conversations about it. All right, maybe that's a little too specific for me. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's you've made some bad decisions at some point in your life and ended up somewhere you didn't want to be. Or maybe you're just having a tough season of life. Now, in these circumstances and situations, how many of you can say, you know what, I handled that super well. I handled it so well. I made all the right decisions. I had the best attitude I possibly could have had. I made the most of that bad situation. And how many of us are like, maybe not. Maybe I could have done a few things differently at some point along the way. Well, after college, in between ministry jobs, I had a job that I hated. I didn't like it at all. I was doing warehouse work. I was a forklift driver, reach trucks, containers, pulling orders, that sort of thing. And I didn't like it. And I wasn't that shy about the fact that I didn't like it at times. I really wasn't. And in fact, I really did not handle being in a situation I didn't like very well at all. I had a bad attitude for a lot of that time. I kind of thought that I could run the department better than my boss. And while I didn't necessarily directly tell him that to his face, I'm pretty sure he knew that I thought that. On top of which, I didn't act that well either. Some of the things I was known for was I was known as the guy who got rules created in the warehouse. So I would find some loophole or I would find something that wasn't on the rule book somewhere, and I would try to do something that was going to aid my situation, but was a little bit borderline. So all the time, I was known as the guy who got rules created in the warehouse. To give you an example, I'm driving around on a reach truck, and I'm a little bit bored, and I'm like, I want to listen to music while I do this. So I brought in portable speakers and sat them on my forklift, and would drive around with speakers playing music. Next day, I come in, new rule, no listening to music while driving the reach trucks. And this happened numerous times along the way. Then there was the performance reviews. So ordinarily in performance reviews, we'd get a one-page sheet, front and back, to fill out a few questions on each side. I looked at this and I'm like, I'm going to treat this like Festivus, and this is the airing of grievances. I'm going to talk about all the frustrations I have with the company, with my job, all of it, and one page front and back is not going to cut it. I wrote a 7-page paper about everything that I had a problem with my company and my job and all this stuff, including the markers. They bought cheap magic markers. And let me tell you, if you write with a marker that constantly seems like it's dry all the time and you got to write with it 50 times a day, that's 50 little annoyances, and that just builds up over and over. So I wrote a section about markers. Needless to say, how I handled myself in this situation that I did not like and did not care for, did not go over well, and honestly did not make my life at that company any better at all. I had a poor relationship with my boss. My attitude just kept helping me make worse and worse decisions. And I started getting passed over for things, good things that I wanted because of it. Now, every single one of us has been in circumstances or situations that we didn't want, that we didn't choose, sometimes of our own doing, sometimes have nothing to do with us at all. But how we respond in those moments can have a profound impact on our situation, on our circumstances, and affect those around us. If we respond poorly, we can always make things worse. How many of you know someone who is absolutely miserable? They're in a bad situation, but they can find a way to somehow always make it worse. On the other hand, if we respond well, we can have a bigger impact on the situation, on our lives and the world around us than we even know. But doing that is not easy. And how we respond well in bad situations and tough circumstances, how do we even do that? How do we keep our minds and our attitudes right? How do we keep ourselves from making things worse? And how can we even succeed in trying circumstances? Well, today we're going to look at the story of a man who was regularly forced into bad, terrible, awful circumstances. Yet in the face of that, he continually responded in ways that made his situation better, that made his life better, and made the world around him better. Today, we're going to be looking at Joseph. And Joseph's story is going to give us an incredible example to follow and provide us with some tangible, practical lessons that we can apply whenever we're in a situation that we don't want to be in. So just a little bit of background on Joseph. This is in time way before Jesus. In fact, I should say that this was not actually the Joseph that was Jesus' father. Okay, this is the older Joseph, back when the nation of Israel was just one family. And he was a part of that family. In fact, he had one of the youngest in that family. He had 10 older brothers. And there was a lot of dysfunction in this family. Now, how many of you have older siblings? Okay, a lot of you. How did you treat your older siblings when you were growing up? Those of you who have younger siblings, how did you treat your younger siblings when you were growing up? Probably some tension and some friction there. Now, this family had all of that and more. Add to it the fact that Joseph's father made it plainly known to all of the kids that Joseph was his favorite. So you add sibling rivalry, age differences, family dysfunction, favoritism, all to it. It made for a really messed up family situation. And it kind of comes to a head at one point where Joseph gets a dream from God that his brothers are going to bow down to him. And of course he did what all little brothers do, immediately went and told his older brothers and tried to hold it over their heads. And at this point, they'd had enough. They've had enough of him. They've had enough of the torment, enough of this back and forth. So they decide they're going to kill him. Now, slightly cooler heads prevail, and they decide, no, we're not actually going to kill him. We're just going to sell him off. And so that's what they did. They sold off Joseph to slave traders. And that's where we're going to pick up the story in Genesis 39, right at the top of verse 1. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So this is Joseph's circumstances. This is where Joseph finds himself. He has been betrayed by his family. He has been sold into slavery. He's in a foreign country, and he's been put to work as a slave in a household of someone he doesn't know. He's probably a teenager at this point. Needless to say, this was not a situation or a circumstance he would have chosen or would have wanted to be in. How would you respond if this was you? How would I respond? I mean, I don't respond well when I'm annoyed by other drivers on the road. I constantly think I'm being tortured. I mean, if you think about it, like you pull up on somebody and they're driving the same speed as the vehicle in the right lane. Two of them, both, get over, come on, get over already. I don't respond well in those situations. How are we going to respond well when we're in really tough situations? How do we react? Maybe your typical reaction is you act out. You act out whenever you're in a situation you don't want to be in. Or maybe you're a wallower. We wallow and pity me, and this is terrible, and you just wallow in it. Or maybe you're someone who gets angry, bitter, and resentful. Or maybe your tendency is just to give in and give up. But Joseph didn't do any of that. Joseph chose something different. Joseph chose an entirely different path. So let's start to look at that. Verse 2. Now the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, he gave him success in everything he did. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. We'll stop right there for a moment. So what's the first thing we notice about this? The first thing we notice is that God was with Joseph. God still loved him. God still cared about him. It might not have seemed like it in those circumstances in that moment, but God was still there. And that's the first lesson that we can take from Joseph. Know that God is with you. Know that God is with you. Now, we're going to come back to this one later on, but let's continue in the story. Start with verse 3. When his master saw the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted his care everything he owned. Potiphar puts him in charge of the entire house. And this was a wealthy man in a wealthy nation. This was probably a pretty big house. Puts him in charge of everything. So let me ask you this. Why do you think Potiphar would put his entire household under a foreign slave kid? Why do you think God gave him success in every single thing he did? Do you think they do that for someone who is wallowing, who's seething in anger and bitterness, who's given up? Now for God is incredibly gracious. And there are many times where God gives us things we don't deserve and has acted on our behalf. But Potiphar has absolutely no incentive to give over his household and his kingdom to someone who's acting like that or who has one of those attitudes. Joseph chose a different path, and look where it led him, verse 6. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph was so good at everything he did in managing this household as a slave that the owner just like, whatever, you take care of it, Joseph. You're doing a better job than anybody else. Why did Joseph garner so much trust? How did Joseph have so much success? Why was Joseph able to succeed where so many of us in difficult circumstances tend to fail? There's three things that Joseph did. The first thing Joseph did was Joseph accepted his situation. He accepted the reality of where he was in that moment, in that time and place. He was in Potiphar's house as a slave. Now, accepting your situation and accepting your reality is not the same thing as liking it. It is not the same thing as approving of it or being content with it. Those are not the same thing. But it's about accepting the situation, accepting reality. Let me give you an example. This is hard for us sometimes. I've been trying to lose more weight. And so one of my habits is to get up in the morning and go weigh in. Now, sometimes as I'm approaching the scale, I'm reflecting back on what I ate yesterday. If what I ate yesterday was not particularly great, there is a temptation in my mind of not stepping on that scale, of not wanting to get that information. Now, reality will not change whether I do it or not, but somehow in my mind, if I don't know about it, then I don't have to accept it. And we do this all the time in life. So the first thing Joseph did was accept his situation, understand where he was, accept the reality of where he is in that moment, even if he didn't like it. The next thing Joseph did was to take responsibility for himself and his circumstances. And thirdly, he decides to commit to make it better. Commit to make it better. And that leads us to lesson 2 from Joseph. You don't control your circumstances, but you do control yourself. You don't control your circumstances, but you do control yourself. You control your reactions, you control your mindset, and you control your actions in these moments. And doing that well doesn't happen by accident. Taking control of that does not happen by accident. It is an intentional choice. Think about it. Joseph was in charge of this entire household. What skills do you think he needed to be able to run that household and run it well? He would have needed to learn about the property and how to manage the grounds. He would have had to learn accounting and budgeting. He would have to learn food management. He would have to figure out how to manage the rest of the household staff and be in charge of that. Every single one of these skills are skills he would have developed after he became a slave and ended up in Potiphar's house. Now, there's a story I read recently about a busboy. And this busboy was not happy with his job. He was not happy with his situation. This was a part of life he did not think he would be at this point in his life, a busboy. And he is discontent and dissatisfied with his job, and it was showing. And then he decided to take this idea of taking control of himself and his circumstances seriously. He decided, I'm here, this is where I am, I'm going to do the best I can. So he started showing up on time. He started doing his job and doing it well. And then he started finding opportunities to do a little bit better job and to step in here or there. In 6 months, this guy went from being a busboy, he got 3 promotions just inside of 6 months, all because he decided to take control of his circumstances and take control of himself and his actions. So what about you? Are you choosing to take responsibility for your actions, your reactions, your mindset? If not, we can very easily make things worse by letting our emotions, by letting our bad attitudes, and by letting our anger lead us when we're in tough circumstances. So back to Joseph. Joseph did not just do his household tasks and duties well, he did them with extreme excellence. He dedicated himself to them. He worked hard. He improved his skill. And with God's provision, he was a wild success. Lesson number 3 from Joseph. Do your best regardless of circumstance. Look for ways to make the situation better. Look for opportunities that might exist in trying circumstances. Now for us, this is one of the hardest things for us to conceive of, or even more, to act on and to do. I mean, how are we not supposed to be affected by circumstance? How are we not supposed to let our personal situation affect our effort? It seems crazy sometimes, if not even impossible. Maybe you've experienced this when you've been asked to do something around the house. You've been asked to do something, you don't want to do it. How many of you have ever done the thing where you say, if I do this, but I do it as badly as humanly possible, they may never ask me to do it again? How many of you have ever tried that tactic? Or maybe your tactic is to be passive aggressive. Maybe if I just let them know subtly or not so subtly how much I don't like this. Maybe lashing out is your tactic. Or maybe it's to just whine and complain the whole time you're in it. Does this ever actually work? Has it ever actually helped your situation? Has it ever actually improved your situation or your relationships or whatever you're involved in? Yet we're inclined to do this so often. We're inclined to do this so much. How do we change that? How do we do it differently? It's going to require us to think different. Now, in the late 1990s, when Steve Jobs took over Apple Computer, he launched a campaign for the relaunch of Apple called Think Different. And it featured a bunch of famous people who looked at the world and thought about the world differently. And he put them all on posters with the phrase, think different. For us to be able to do our best despite the circumstances, it's going to require us to think different about our situations, think different about our attitudes, our motivations, and our actions. How should we think? Apostle Paul tells us this in Colossians chapter 3. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Whatever you do it with all your heart as you're working for God. Act well, work well, do things well, regardless of how terrible your circumstances are. And this requires a shift in our mentality, because so often when we're in tough circumstances, we focus on the circumstances. We focus on the people that are involved or the reason that why we got there. But it doesn't matter how or where or what happened or who. Our actions are not supposed to be dependent on our circumstances. Our attitudes, our choices, how we act are between us and they're between God. And God wants your best. Now, maybe you're here this morning and you're not sure about this whole God thing. So maybe doing this for God isn't going to be much of a motivation for you. But I would encourage you, try this. Next time you're in a difficult circumstance, try giving it your all. Try doing your best and see what happens. Joseph gave his best effort, not because he was doing it for Potiphar, but because he was doing it for God. That's how he was able to make that switch. Because he gave his best for God, he had an impact well beyond what he would realize. And it opened up his mind to hidden opportunities that existed within it. There's another story of a man named Rico. And Rico was an assembly line worker. And if you've ever been on an assembly line, that is boring work. Same thing over and over again all day. And Rico's job was to examine the audio-visual equipment, the cameras that come on his line. He would have 43 seconds to quality check the camera before the next one comes down the road. And he didn't like his job. And it seemed like a dead end. But he decided, I was going to make the best of this circumstance I possibly can. And so he decided to turn it into a game, saying, how can I do this better? How can I mess with this process? I'm going to try different things out to try and improve this process, see what I can do. And he made it a game to himself. Of the 43 seconds he did, originally, he got it down to 28 seconds. He managed to figure out a way to still do incredible work at 28 seconds. But more so, what he discovered was that he had an absolute love for electrical engineering. And he discovered that on the assembly line. And then he started taking night classes to get his degree in electrical engineering. All because he decided, I'm just going to do my best where I'm at. Joseph learned all the skills he needed to manage a large, wealthy estate. And he gained experience in daily decision-making and forecasting. And he learned confidence that God was with him. And it's a good thing that Joseph gained confidence that God was with him, because he was going to need it. In the interim, as this was going on, Potiphar's wife takes an interest in him. Joseph rejects her. His wife accuses Joseph of rape. And Joseph finds himself in prison unjustly. Verse 20. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now remember lesson number 1. Know that God is with you. After all that Joseph had been through, all the stuff with his family leading up to that, he gets to Potiphar's house. He still trusts God. He does the hard work. He shows up. He makes everything better. Potiphar puts him in charge. He's faithful to Potiphar. And what is his reward? His reward is prison. His reward is prison. Just when it seems like Joseph, with God's favor, had pulled himself up off the mat, he gets dealt another gut punch. Second half of verse 20. But while Joseph was there in prison, he cursed God, rejected his faith, and vowed to never have anything to do with him. No, he didn't say that. That's not what the scripture says. But would you have blamed him? Honestly, would you have blamed him in that circumstance? See, this is where the danger zone exists for some of us. We start to make a move towards God. We start to make changes. We start doing things God's way. We start trying to improve. We start to see some progress. Things are getting better. and then you get hit with a disaster. Maybe it's an unexpected failure. Maybe it ends up being a loss of a friend or a family. Maybe you get a severe illness. Maybe you've been working on your finance and you finally got in a good place and your car dies on you. When these things happen, sometimes every fiber of our being wants to just blame God. God, you don't care about me. God, this way of yours, it doesn't work. I'm giving up. And we have a tendency to give in to discouragement and to doubt. Maybe you've known someone who that's a part of their story. Maybe that's been a part of your story and your journey this morning. But Joseph was not going to let that be part of his story. Here's what verse 20 and 21 actually says. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God was still with him. God still cared for him. Despite all the horrible setbacks and everything going on, Joseph kept his faith, and he doubled down on the strategy. He was doing his best. He was working hard. He was finding opportunities. Verse 22. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. He doubles down on it. He does his best despite the circumstances. He's an inmate literally running the prison. Did his best despite the circumstances. Lesson number 3. Now, in the interim, Joseph's story continues taking ups and downs, more turns, all of these type of things. And he winds himself in just the most Joseph situation imaginable. Pharaoh has a dream he can't interpret. Lo and behold, Joseph is the guy who has the God-given gift for dreams. And he ends up face to face with Pharaoh, the head of Egypt. And this kind of encapsulates Joseph's story, his unwavering faith and trust in God, his making the most of situations, his learning skills and acquiring talents while he was in captivity. He interprets Pharaoh's dream and tells him, Pharaoh, there's a famine coming. Not only is there a famine coming, here's what you do about it. Here's how you succeed. Here's how you avoid the famine, and here's how you make everything better. Because of his vast experience he'd gained running a wealthy household, running a jail and a prison, he knew what to do with what God gave him. And he had the confidence to tell it to Pharaoh, even though he was a prisoner. Chapter 41, verse 39. Pharaoh sees this and recognizes something's up. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Now Joseph is a prisoner running the entire kingdom of Egypt. It's an incredible story. I encourage you, read the whole thing. It's an amazing story. There's so many things in it. Joseph saves Egypt from a terrible famine. Eventually, he even saves his own family and gets the opportunity to reunite and reconcile with his long-lost brothers. At each stop, God not only blessed him, but blessed wherever he was. Blessed Potiphar's house, blessed the inmates in the prison, blessed the nation of Egypt, and even blessed his long-estranged family that kicked off this entire journey. All of this because Joseph chose a mindset and an action when he was faced with difficult circumstances that he didn't want to be in. Every single one of us finds ourselves at times in situations we don't want to be in, difficult hardship circumstances, and each of us has to decide how to handle it. So as we close out, I'm going to give you 4 specific things that we can do, actions that we can take from the lessons of Joseph. 2 of them are going to be about our mentality, and 2 of them are going to be something we can do in actions. Number 1, pre-decide to trust in God. Pre-decide to trust in God. Decide in your mind ahead of time, whenever I face difficult circumstances, I am going to choose to trust in God. And the reason why pre-deciding is important is because in the moment when you get in there, you're not going to want to feel like it. You don't feel like it, you're not going to want to do it. If you decide in ahead, That's one less thing you have to deal with and the emotions that come with being in tough circumstances. Number 2, take responsibility and ownership for where you are. Take responsibility. You didn't choose it, you don't want it, but you have to deal with it. And by taking responsibility, it gives you back control of the one thing that you can control, namely yourself. Number 3, do your best. How can you make it better? Whatever circumstance you're in, how can you make it better? What ways can you do to make that situation a little bit better? Or if you can't think of anything, what ways can you do to not make it worse? Remember, you are doing this for God, not for people, not for circumstances. Finally, find opportunities. Is your circumstance showing you an area where you could improve? Is there a relational connection that you might be able to make in the midst of that circumstance that can be a benefit? Is there a skill you can learn? Is this situation helping you spend more time with God? Or is it offering you an opportunity to trust God and let go? If you want to respond today on your connection card, I want you to choose one of these. Which one of these do you need work on? Which one of these do you need help with? Write it down in your connection card. Put it in the black box on your way out. We'd love to be praying for you this week.
Thanks again for listening. Any step you take towards Jesus is a step in the right direction. You can find out more about us at crbic.org. That's crbic.org.